So this whakatauki is an important one about learning, and of course the session is based importantly on teaching and how our ākonga learn. So I like this whakatauki around learning through life. Mā te mōhio ka ora, mā te ora ka mōhio. So through learning there's life, through life there is learning. And it's great that you're all here learning together with me this morning. And I look forward to you sharing with me and each other over the next hour. This session is on tailored teaching, and that's the name of it. And as I said, it comes from the teaching standards, the ACE teaching standards. We devised 12 sessions based on standards, and this one is around customizing approaches for every learner. Just to contextualise where I'm based this one on, so as I said to you earlier, ACE have teaching standards which you can find on their website, and this particular session today is based on the commitment focus there of the standards. This one is on 1.3, adjusting teaching approaches to address the needs of individuals and groups of learners. So it's a big topic and certainly not one that I can justify well in an hour, but I hope what I've chosen to cover will address that particular teaching standard. So the teaching standards are there for all of us to recognise what makes a good tutor. So if you're a tutor, you want to just check in about, so am I doing well? I always find those ACE teaching standards really helpful to remind me of the things that have been recognised as really good practice in teaching adults. So do have a look at them. So it is a big topic, but I've tried to condense it into looking in particular at learning styles. So some of you know something already about learning styles. I suspect a number of you do. Perhaps some of you don't either, but that's what I've chosen to focus on within this hour. And so we'll look at that first of all, then we'll look at a little bit more detail in other learning styles. Then I'll invite you to talk about your teaching, and then always at the end I like to offer you an opportunity to think, so what? What has worked for me from the session, or as in what is the bit that I'll take away and maybe try at another stage? So that's the point of these sessions too, is to share some of my ideas, some of the research out there, some of the resources out there, and for you to think about, oh yeah, I might use that bit, that could be useful, I'll give that a go, I'll try that, I'll share that with my other tutors. So that's our aim for today. Okay, on to what we're looking at today. So just actually as a show of hands, so let's see, you go to your bottom panel there. You can actually let me know at some stage by putting up your hand. So if you can find reactions and do that, could you raise your hand to let me know if you know anything about VAK or VARK learning styles already? Okay, thank you. That just gives me a bit of a sense. So do feel free, those of you who've raised your hands, it looks like there's about 7 of you, 8 of you there. Please add your own knowledge about learning styles. I just will say that sometimes people in academia have rubbished the idea of learning styles. And perhaps some of you are familiar with that alternative view. And so whilst I'm aware of it, and have read a lot of that research regarding the kind of negative view, if you like, of learning styles as a way to approach teaching, I think the benefits far outweigh the negative. And I guess, like me, you're probably aware that always with anything we try, some people will go, nah, that's not appropriate, or that's not going to work, or, you know, philosophically, academically, I don't agree with that, culturally, I don't agree with that. So, you know, there's always going to be people who may dismiss some of the ways that we interact. So can I just say that, you know, I guess like everything in research, there's always going to be a view that this will work for some educators and some educators will choose not to use it. So there's no compulsion for you to do it. I've found it successful and I like to use it, and that's why I'm going to share it with you this morning. So we'll just start with this first slide, just because I can see probably most of you are not aware particularly of the learning styles approach. And certainly there's more I can talk about, but I will just go into this brief detail here. Initially, there was work done only on VAK, and so that was the idea of visual, auditory, and a word that's often tricky, kinesthetic. But more recently, in the 90s, Neil Fleming and from actually Lincoln University in Ōtautahi and Charles Bodwell from the United States decided to add in more to that. So you'll see that VAK perfectly catered for the learning styles. The visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners were catered for very well. And I like those descriptors there. And sometimes I get a sense when I'm working with learners and they use language that means that that I can tell that they're a visual or an auditory or a kinesthetic learner. It's really obvious with adults because the predominant group or the dominant group there are always the kinesthetic learners. So whatever group of learners I'm working with, whether at the Polytech, whether in the prisons, whether in the community, most adults prefer that let me do it. And I suspect you'll be finding that with your own adults. As I said, Bonwell and Fleming introduced VARK, and they just felt that there was a group of learners that we weren't addressing there, and that was the group of learners that were known as the read-write learners. So that's why the R is added into the VAK. So we'll talk a little bit more about VARK shortly. And that's, as you can see, there's people like reading, people like writing, and you'll have a sense of learners like that. In fact, many of you may be like that yourself. So speaking of yourself, I'm going to conduct a poll now, and it's a poll in response to how do you learn. And so I'd like you to just give one response there to whether you're a visual learner, an auditory learner, a read-write, or a kinesthetic. I know some of you may think you're a combo, but for the purpose of the poll, can we just have, please, one response today from the 26 of you who are online? All right, so if you could respond now, that will be fantastic. Thank you. Nearly 22 of the 23 of you, 100% that have answered. Yes, look at that. Isn't that great that Bonwell and Fleming and read-write? There you are, a majority of you as read-writers, closely followed by the kinesthetic, then the visual. So, yeah, the percentage-wise there is 48% read-write, 35 kinesthetic, 17 visual, and sadly, not sadly, well, yes, it is sad often that there is not a group there that favour auditory. And that's actually very true of the general adult population. And sadly, that's sad actually, is what is the major style that people have traditionally taught in? And that's like I'm doing now, talk to you and you listen. And so this is where I find learning styles useful, because if we all taught, and many people do, in that traditional style of me only talking to you and I expect you to listen, just in that small snapshot that we've taken this morning out of 24 educators, you can see that no one is finding listening helpful. No one is learning, perhaps, by just listening. So that's why a learning styles is always a beautiful reminder to me that it's not about one style and one style only. So I just draw to your attention that even though you have a favourite that you prefer, the key thing is, I know you'll be aware, is that when we teach, we need to teach to people who have a range of learning styles. So for me personally, I do have a preference often for visual or auditory too. But I do need to just be aware that when I teach, that I need to provide handouts, that I need to give writing opportunities, and importantly, I need to give kinesthetic, that's hands-on activities where people can really learn that way. So that's my experience of learning style. So I'll end the poll. Thank you for participating in that. Thanks for setting it up too. Viv. Okay, let's move on. So just a little bit about learning styles now. And I just wanted to really cover a few general points about learning styles. So from the research around learning styles, whether it's VAK, whether it's VARK, or whether it's a different type of learning styles too, generally they can apply to all people regardless, as you can see there, of age, gender, or ethnicity. There's absolutely no connection between learning style and intelligence, and I just want to make that clear because for some people they do feel that if the hands-on only, their level of ability and intelligence is less perhaps than others who may be a read-write learner. So just always keep that in mind. It doesn't matter. Sadly, I think some of that comes from our universities, and I don't want to be completely critical of university tutors, lecturers, but many of them teach in a one style only approach. I know many of them try options and to be more interactive, but there are a lot of educators still who work in the listening auditory mode as opposed to thinking about involving people, thinking about giving people a chance to learn visually. They're probably pretty high on the auditory and the read-write, but many are not involved in kinesthetic learning or offer kinesthetic learning opportunities. And the last point I just want to make here is, as I said earlier, we have preferred styles. They're not fixed though, so we can look at different ways of working as opposed to sometimes where, we feel that we're stuck with one style. We are fluid, we can alternate. Sorry, Viv, you had a question there?
Yes, there's a question from Dorothy. Does this mean we ought to be doing sessions on active learning?
Yes. Thanks, Dorothy. Yes. Yes. So, yes, you're right. We possibly could be doing more sessions on active learning, and perhaps I can, add that to another session. I guess, yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. I'll make a note of that. Yeah. I mean, is it a question that we can all take on board? But I could do some more research and look at active learning. I haven't included it as a type in this session. I'm focused on learning styles, and active learning is part, I see it as part of kinesthetic. Do you want to add anything in there, Dorothy, or ask anything further? Feel
I
free.
intended that to be active listening.
Oh, okay.
So that it was an aid to their vocabulary, response, conversation, communication
Yes.
style.
Yeah, for sure. Active listening. Yeah, I was thinking I'll look and investigate more about active learning. But yeah, active listening is totally important in any communication activity. Thank you for clarifying that. So that's an opportunity to really listen to what the person's saying, not just agree, but like reflect back what that person is saying to you. Thanks, Dorothy, for reminding us of that. Let's move on to considering VARK again. So, as I said earlier, it helps me think about my learning style, but importantly, whenever I'm planning any teaching, it helps me think about, am I catering for visual learners? Am I catering for auditory learners? Is there something for the read writers? Is there something for the kinesthetic? And for those of you who are interested, there's a questionnaire that I've used for many, many years, and I like the fact that Bonwell and Fleming have updated it to a more modern approach. They used to use maps as real maps, but now they're referring to maps on our phones. So that questionnaire is there. We haven't got time today to look at it, but do have a look at their site and do, I've downloaded many times the questionnaire and shared it with educators, shared it with people who are working with adults. So they get a sense for themselves of their preferred styles, but importantly, they get a sense of who the people are that they're working with, what their preferred style is as well. It just helps, I think. The more we know about our learners, the more I find that I can work really well with them and cater to their needs. I'm just going through a couple of slides now so you get a sense of, so what is it that I'm talking about when I say, let's work with, how do I work with a visual learner? So this is what you can do as far as working with visual learners. And sometimes some of these ideas might work really well, other times it might be difficult. I guess there's perhaps a preference for us to be using PowerPoint these days, but do feel free to, wherever possible, offer the idea of mind mapping ideas. You know, that's the idea where you put an idea in the middle of a circle and then you expand on it. So visually, learners love that, particularly if they get to do it with coloured pens. And, you know, and of course, encourage the opportunity for people to use pictures, to underline their work, to use boxing around their work, all of those things that we know visual learners like. And you might choose to do that as well to sort of, you know, spice up your approaches by trying some of those ways to appeal to the visual learners. For the auditory learners, they really love talking to others. And so that's probably kind of a win-win as far as kinesthetic, because they're actually doing something with others. But they love the opportunity to listen to a recording afterwards. They love to have discussions in the class. They love those kind of things like quizzes, debates, reading out aloud. That sort of thing really helps them with their learning. So try and incorporate some ideas like that within the session as well. And then if we move on to the next idea there, how do we work with the read writers? And most of you will know that you like having the handout, you like having the opportunity to take notes, you like looking at websites, you like those links, you need those. And many a time I've been teaching in various contexts and there'll be a read writer who'll say, is there a handout for that? Or, you know, can we find out afterwards? Or so they're really clear that they want that information. And I always make sure whenever I'm teaching now that I tell people they will get the slides, because there's nothing worse for a read writer than to not know if the slides are going to be shared. Also, if there's not going to be a handout. So that I try and do all of these things whenever I'm teaching. The last one there, the kinesthetic, so that's around doing action activity. And the more that you can do that, again, the more you'll appeal to a bigger group of your learners. I appreciate it's not always possible to be in a lab or to do something hands-on, and sometimes people are frightened of acting out. But I find continuums is probably one of the ways that work the best for me with kinesthetic. So a continuum needs no resource apart from the people in your class. And I enjoy it because I can quickly do it in any space and invite learners to make a decision that's either yes or no, or good or bad, or, you know, 100% or 0%. So I may ask them a question, you know, how many of you know anything about learning styles? And so that if they go and stand on an invisible line known as a continuum in the room, based from 100% to 0% or to a little to a lot, that gives me a sense very quickly. And I find that was one way, at least in some organisations where they don't enjoy kinesthetic, it helps with the kinesthetic learners. So Judith just added some ideas there in the chat with adult teaching, learning process. Which one do we consider first, learners' goals and needs, then Bart's learning styles preferences second, or learning styles first? And yeah, it's a tricky one, Judith. I think it's their goals and needs first from my point of view. It's a good question there to ask. Go with their goals and needs first and then their learning styles. And remember, learning styles is just one aspect of who they are as the learner. So I think the critique of learning styles is not to be rigid, but to be kind of bit fluid around what learning styles looks like, just to be aware of trying different approaches instead of just talking like I'm doing, is to think of how can I make this a little bit more interesting for the other third of learners. Obviously, auditorily, I'm addressing 1/3, but there's, 3 other groups now that I'm not addressing. All right, let's move on. This is a chance then for you. So I have tried to be a bit kinesthetic and give you an opportunity to work together. So thanks to Viv, she's going to now put you into breakout rooms. And in your breakout rooms, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to introduce yourselves to each other and to talk to each other about what do you do? What sort of things are you doing? I've asked the question there, how do you teach adults with different learning styles? So just introduce yourself, where you're at, and when you work with your learner, what sort of things are you doing? You've heard me talk about continuums. You've heard me talk about handouts. You've heard me talk about use of colour. I like to do that, so I like to put a picture on my slide always. And you've heard me talk about auditory. But I think what's really valuable in these sessions is you to share from around the country about what sort of things you do. So as I said, you'll have 10 minutes. Could one of you feed back a few of the ideas, please? So in your group, if one of you could just share a few ideas when we come back, that will be fantastic.
Yeah, with cultural differences, what I've noticed working with different cultures and stuff is that there can be a dominant style of learning in a certain culture. Like a lot of South African cultures that people that I've met, they have a lot of kind of focus on oral learning. So they're really good at memorizing thing and reproducing, stuff learning through listening and that kind of stuff. Quite a few cultures, like I think a European culture dominated by writing and that kind of reading. In some cultures like the drawing and those kind of painting and that kind of visual stuff is quite dominant. So the learning styles are almost the same, but it can be one learning style can be quite often used and more prominently kind of dominant in that. So
yeah, thank you, Amina, for that. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Sometimes we are trained to work with a particular learning style dependent on our culture. Yeah, I think that's a good point. So welcome back, everyone. I'm sorry it probably wasn't enough time for you all to talk about this, but thank you for having a chance and sharing with each other. Would anyone like to share now? I know that we had about 6 groups and we've just got a little amount of time, so it needs to be quite short. But has anyone got some good things that they heard now about what do people do? How are they teaching people so they're tailoring their teaching to individual needs?
It was really interesting. In our room, we had a different culture who was heavily reliant on modern technology to be able to deliver her style of learning. We had another person who has been forced to move into online training, which is very different from what she's been used to, and adapt. Her feeling was that it makes it very difficult to incorporate all 4 areas when you're on the other side of a computer. And of course, I mean, I know you and you know me, and we working in the disability sector. It is important that we incorporate all 4 areas with all of our learners. And so we do that by giving the resources that you're right, colourful, step-by-step processes. The auditory is, this is how we're going to start the day. This is what we expect it to progress like. And here it is in written form. So you've got your visual, and then the kinesthetic one is actually doing the learning, and it's repetitive. Sometimes kinesthetic also means holding somebody's hands or helping to support them in practical terms to learn those skills.
Thank you, Jenna.
What we also found was that learners sometimes have to have it repeated several times, and their actual embedding of the learning happens when they start demonstrating to somebody else.
Nice. When they teach back, when they show. Fantastic, lovely summary there, Janice, and thanks for giving perspective about working with people with disabilities. I really appreciate that. It's lovely, Viv, thanks, has put something in the chat there about like our Māori work traditionally orally, but with less conventional literacy, but having weaving and carving. That's great. Anyone else like to quickly share what was happening in their group? Feel free to put it in the chat or to share orally now. Anyone else like to share?
I'll speak for our group.
Thank you.
So we were made up of 4 people. So we had teachers and we had a coach that teaches refugees. So there's that barrier of,
Sure.
the different languages and communication. So where visual learning and communication comes into play. And then we had me, who works as well with rangatahi with diverse abilities and disabilities.
Yes.
So as a conclusion, we all do a bit of everything.
Right. Great.
And one of the people in my group suggested that sometimes intentionally getting learners to do something intentionally, so that they're busy before they're actually thinking about it.
Yeah.
So that they're already
yeah.
engaged, if that makes sense.
Yes,
And
before
I
they
think,
know what they're doing, they're suddenly doing
Yeah.
something they didn't think to do. Yeah. You know.
and a good reminder that we kind of took away from it is that not everyone likes to listen,
No.
especially if you're in the disability sector or you're a diverse learner, which reminds us to take a step back and limit, less is more, side by side learning. And one of the other key takeaways was it's a lot more than just learning. There's social skills building as well as allowing the brain to absorb information. So allowing learners were all 4 of these learning styles to take those brain breaks without repercussions and allowing them to be autonomously themselves and learn at their own pace rather than I guess that mainstream, you have to do this now, facilitating their needs as well.
Yeah, thank you, Zara, and your group. And again, some really good points there to remind us, and thanks for sharing. And I think we're going to run out of time, sadly, for everyone to feedback, but feel free to put it in the chat. Elrica, I see that you've put in there that giving time and space for gratitude and appreciation and acts as an embedded enforcer to the learning. Yeah, that's really lovely to write that. And that certainly is a good approach, particularly one that you could incorporate, add in for all learners. So you're really tailoring the learning for them. Busy hands, open minds. Yeah, I have learners like this. Yeah, I'm sure many of you do as well. So I'm sorry, we will move on. And if any of you from your groups, group 5, depending on their needs and goals, teacher facilitators have to be more observant, of the strengths and limitations of the learners, and then what learning styles may be introduced. Thank you very much, Judith, for group 5 feedback. I find this next slide a helpful one to me, and it's whenever I'm doing any planning for teaching, I think about this. Whatever I want to get across, I think, okay, I might have something that I can share with people from the point of view of reading, writing, but actually, can I involve people as a hands-on? Have I got something that people can listen to? Have I got something that people can look at? So that's what I'm always trying to do. That's why I find learning styles helpful. Thanks, Amina. Look at board games, audio, computers, lots of great ideas. Just to really, I'm going to have to go fast, but I just wanted to share with you one more approach to learning styles. This looks a little bit like multiple intelligence theory, but there are other learning styles that I just wanted to quickly share. There's linguistic, logical, intrapersonal, and interpersonal as well. So these slides will be sent to you, so you'll get to see them. But we know about visual learners. We know what they like there. We've already talked about that. I'm going to move on quickly to the next one there. We know about auditory learners. We know what they like there. Podcast we hadn't talked about. Let's have a look though at the kinesthetics. We've talked about that. Again, real life examples is fantastic for kinesthetic learners. This is perhaps a bit new, looking at linguistic learners. This is around people who love to communicate all the time. It's probably a bit like the read writers, but they like a lot more time to talk about their learning. And then just the next two there, we've got logical, mathematical, and that's those people who love to break down the learning into steps. They love those kind of ideas about flowcharts, a bit like some of the others as well, but they are really key on the logical approach to learning. And then just the last two I want to share with you are the intrapersonal. And so there's always going to be learners who appreciate learning where they have time for reflection and where they can step back, where they can think about the learning, and perhaps they like time on their own. So this is a key group that I think is really important to consider as well. And then the final group I want to just mention are the interpersonal. So perhaps a little bit like the linguistics, but they do all their learning or love all their learning essentially with discussions. They have great emotional intelligence and they really like to be able to learn best this way. So I'm sorry I've rushed those slides, but just gives you an overview of not just VARC, but have a think about other approaches for learners too. So lots to always think about when we teach. It's a big job and you all do amazingly wherever you are. And thanks for joining in. I know many of you will know much of this, but I often think it's a good chance to step back myself and think, what is it that I've learned today? So I've gone through VARC, I've gone through quickly learning styles, you've shared with each other, you've thought about your teaching. What will you do differently? That's my key last question to you at 11:29. What will you do differently based on this 1 hour of reminder for some of you or intro for others of you? So that's your challenge. Are there any closing thoughts or reflections or partai, any questions for today? I often like to invite you what you will do differently to write in the chat, and I'd love to see that. I appreciate that some of you need to head away. I'm just going to close with a karakia. But other than that, thanks very much for joining. Do keep up the great work you're doing. I know around the country, it's fantastic to see so many of you who work in wonderful aged organisations. And do get in touch if you had any questions ever with me. As I said, you'll get the slides, you'll get the recording, but good luck. And do tell me if there's anything that you'll do, you know, like that question. I just want to say again, what will you do differently? It's like, that's the key. So what? You've thought about it again, but what can you do? So thanks again for joining. Thanks for your feedback there. You're going to do some more research on the learners at the end. Thanks for that, Jane. Okay, yeah, happy Easter, everyone. Yeah, great to review examples of actions. Yeah, builds the kite. And that's what's great. And thank you for doing that, for bothering so much about your learners that you want to keep refreshed and learn different approaches. So we'll close with karakia. You're going to try more into intra. Yeah, I struggle with the intra, giving people enough time on their own, but it's a good one to incorporate. We'll close with karakia. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā, manakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau ao, ki te aorangi. Peace to the universe, peace to you all over this Easter period. Have a wonderful holiday.